Today we'll be working in my workbook called Paul From Preacher to Prisoner, which covers Paul's third missionary journey. This gets covered in Acts chapters 18, verses 23, and 2 chapters 23, verses 24. Looking at the table of contents, we have completed the first 3 chapters. Right. And so basically, we start off, and these 3 chapters are all in the city of Ephesus. We started off first. Paul wasn't yet in Ephesus, but Apollos. We get introduced to the evangelist Apollos here, and when Apollos moves over to Corinth, Paul comes into Ephesus, and he's preaching in Ephesus, and he does such a good job that people are burning up their sorcery scrolls and everything like that. And which leads to chapter 3. Demetrius, a silversmith, and the various tradesmen that were building statues for the temple of Artemis or Diana were losing their business. And business was going down because people were starting to believe in the way. So they create a riot in Ephesus, trying to get everything to stop. And it finally gets stopped by the city clerk so that the Rome wouldn't accuse Ephesus of having a riot. So now we get into chapter 4. So, chapter 4. Chapter 4, Macedonia, Greece, and back to Troas, Acts 20, 1 through 12.
Okay, when the uproar had ended, Paul sent for the disciples and, after encouraged them, said goodbye and set out for Macedonia.
So, what uproar?
The craftsmen, their trade was decreasing due to Paul's preaching.
Right, the riot in Ephesus, you're correct. Looking again at Acts 19:21, where did he say he was going?
Jerusalem.
Yeah, Paul decided to go to Jerusalem, passing through Macedonia and Troas, maybe? Okay, I don't know what the... Where is he now?
Where is he now? Macedonia.
Right, and set out for Macedonia. So he's still in Ephesus, but he's setting out for Macedonia and circle that city. So we're going to circle the city of... He hasn't left Ephesus. He's on his way. So shape fill, no fill. Okay. He is planning to go to the region of Macedonia, make a line on the land from Ephesus to Troas, Philippi, Thessalonica, and Berea. Sure, I can make that line. Yeah, that's not easy. I can only do straight lines, author of this book. What do you think? Okay, Troas to Philippi. And then how far do we want to go? Thessalonica and Berea. Okay. Thessalonica and Berea. Well, something like that. Okay. Something like that.
Yeah.
What did Paul do before he left the city?
Sent for the disciples.
And encouraged them, right, and said goodbye. Do you remember how long he'd been in the city, Ephesus?
2 years.
Right, just over 2 years, you're right. Looking at the graph on page 4, what letter did he write while he was in Ephesus?
1st and 2nd Corinthians.
Right, you're right. He wrote 1st and 2nd Corinthians while he was in the 2 years in Ephesus. The gleanings from Paul's letters to the Corinthians will tell us more from details. See in the next page. A lot of what we know about his trip actually comes from the letters. That's why we intermix the letters with Acts, because he helped us learn so much from his letters about his trips. So gleanings from Paul's letter to the Corinthians. Go ahead and read that one.
Okay, 1 Corinthians 16:1. Now about the collection of the Lord's people, do what I told the Galatian churches to do. On the first day of every week, each one of you should set aside a sum of money in keeping with your income, saving it up so that when I come, no collections will have to be made. Then when I arrive, I will give letters of introduction to the men you approve and send them with your gift to Jerusalem. If it seems advisable for me to go, also they will accompany me. After I go through Macedonia, I will come to you, for I will be going through Macedonia. Perhaps I will stay with you for a while, or even spend the winter, so that you can help me on my journey wherever I go. For I do not want to see you now and make it only a passing visit. I hope to spend some time with you, if the Lord permits, but I will stay on at Ephesus until Pentecost, because a great door for effective work has opened to me, and there are many who oppose me.
What had Paul told the Galatian churches, whom he had already visited, and now the Corinthian churches, to do?
Save your money.
Right. Gather your monies on the first day of the week so that when I'm there, we don't have to do a collection. This was due to the famine that had been in the land of Judah, which was talked about below, Acts 11:27-30. During this time, when Paul and Barnabas were still in Antioch before his first missionary journey, some prophets came down from Jerusalem to Antioch. One of them, named Agabus, stood up and through the Spirit predicted that a severe famine will spread over the entire Roman world. This happened during the reign of Claudius, about 47 AD. The disciples, as each one was able, decided to provide help for the brothers and sisters living in Judea. This they did, sending their gifts to the elders by Barnabas and Saul. So Saul is continuing that even on his second missionary trip. He hasn't stopped collecting money for the Judean churches. From this passage, who may be accompanying Paul on his trip to Jerusalem?
Men from city of Corinth.
Okay. This may be the reason why we have a number of men joining him towards the end of this journey. Basically, as he goes to each city, those men are going to go with him and continue so that when he travels to Jerusalem, he has quite a crowd of men representing the various churches that he's collected money from. When is he actually leaving Ephesus?
On Pentecost.
This is actually after a little more than 1 year in Ephesus, as he will try to get to Jerusalem before the next Pentecost. Why did he stay so long at Ephesus?
A great door for effective work has opened for me. To
Right.
me.
Yep. So now back to the scripture we're reading.
He traveled through that area, speaking many words of encouragement to the people, and finally arrived in Greece, where he stayed 3 months.
What did Paul do as he traveled through the area to Greece?
Speaking many words of encouragement to the people.
Again, this is a brief version of Paul's trip. We have some detail in 2 Corinthians. Go ahead and read that.
2 Corinthians 2:12-13. Now, when I went to Troas to preach the gospel of Christ and found that the Lord had opened a door for me, I still had no peace of mind, because I did not find my brother Titus there. So I said goodbye to them and went on to Macedonia.
What is one town we know he stopped in on his way to Greece?
Troas.
Yeah, Troas. We know that this happened on this trip, as he has written 1 Corinthians in Ephesus, and you would write 2 Corinthians in Macedonia. Why could Paul not concentrate in Troas?
I did not find my brother Titus there.
What happened to Titus? And we'll discuss his story on the next page. From Troas, Paul goes to where?
Macedonia.
In Romans 15:19, it gives the impression that Paul made it clear over to Illyricum, west from the letter M in Macedonia above, which is on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. So he's gone even farther than what says in Acts. So who and where is Titus? We first meet Titus in Galatians 2. This happened after the first missionary journey, and Paul is going to Jerusalem for the Jerusalem Council. And I'll read this one, Galatians 2:1-3. Then after 14 years, I went up again to Jerusalem, this time with Barnabas. I took Titus along also. I went in response to a revelation, and meeting privately with those esteemed as leaders, I presented to them the gospel that I preached among the Gentiles. I wanted to be sure I was not running and had not been running my race in vain. Yet even Titus, who was with me, was compelled to be circumcised, even though he was a Greek. So we meet him for the first time when he goes down. Yeah, and we've read about that. That was a couple of chapters ago in book after the first a missionary trip. Before the second, they went down to Jerusalem to have the Jerusalem Council, and that's what he's writing here, and Titus went with him on that. We do not hear about Titus again until 2 Corinthians, shown on the prior page. Go ahead and read that.
2 Corinthians 2:12-13. Now, when I went to Troas to preach the gospel of Christ and found that the Lord had opened a door for me, I still had no peace of mind because I did not find my brother Titus there. So I said goodbye to them and went on to Macedonia.
Where did Titus go and why? Through Paul's letters, we can piece together the story. It is believed that Titus took the first letter of the Corinthians from Paul, who wrote it in Ephesus, over to Corinth to both chastise them for their immorality and also to collect funds from the Christians in Jerusalem. In Paul's second letter to the Corinthians, written in Macedonia, he gives detail of Titus's mission. Go ahead and read that.
2 Corinthians 8:12-6-7. And now, brothers and sisters, we want you to know about the grace that God has given the Macedonian churches. In the midst of a very severe trial, their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty welled up in rich generosity. So we urge Titus, just as he had earlier made a beginning, to bring also to completion this act of grace on your part, that since you excel in everything, in faith and speech, in knowledge, in complete earnestness, and in the love we have kindled in you, see that you also excel in this grace of giving.
We do know that Titus did come to Paul in Macedonia. 2 Corinthians 7:5-7. From when we came into Macedonia, we had no rest, but we were harassed at every turn, conflicts on the outside, fears within. But God, who comforts the downcast, comforted us by the coming of Titus, not only by his coming, but also by the comfort you had given him. Go ahead and read the next one.
2 Corinthians 7:13b-14. We were especially delighted to see how happy Titus was, because his spirit has been refreshed by all of you. I had boasted to him about you, and you have not embarrassed me. But just as everything we said to you was true, so our boasting about you to Titus has proved to be true as well.
So basically what we're seeing is all the work behind the scenes of these guys that have been sent around with Paul. Paul, when he gets to Macedonia in our scripture, he's worried about Titus, but we do find out Titus does arrive in Macedonia and connects up with Paul. So everything works out well, but we don't get that in Acts. We get that in letters.
Okay, because some Jews had plotted against him just as he was about to sail for Syria, he decided to go back through Macedonia.
Right. So he is down in here and he wants to go home. But because there's people who are going to plot and maybe kill him as he's on the ship, he's going to travel up through Macedonia to again. Paul traveled from Ephesus to Troas. Make a line from one to another. Oh, thanks. Ephesus to Troas. Sure. Okay. Then we know he would have gone to Philippi and Thessalonica with a possible side trip to Iconium, then down to Corinth. Make a line through these cities and then down to Corinth. Well, I'm not going to do it. Troas to Philippi, Philippi to Thessalonica, probably through Berea. We know he went over to the coast. Then he comes down to Corinth. So he's down in Corinth. And from Corinth and Achaia, that's the region is Achaia, he wanted to sail to where?
Syria.
Right, which is his hometown, his home church. This is where Antioch, his home church, is. Why did Paul not sail to Syria after all?
Because some Jews plotted against him.
Which is always throughout his ministry. There were Jews plotting against him. He was always trying to be one step ahead. What was the plot about? We don't have a clear idea, but we have some clues. Commentators suggest that Paul may have intended to reach Jerusalem by Passover and travel on a Jewish pilgrim ship. Fanatical Jews would have found a vessel at sea, a convenient place to dispose of Paul, perhaps throwing them overboard during the night. Or two, no doubt the collection money Paul was carrying would have been an added inducement to murder him, although he did have men traveling with him, as we will soon see. Knowing Paul and his work, why do you think the Jews were plotting against him?
Because he supports the way.
Right. Yes, he supports, and he was a good speaker of it too, because he's making a difference.
Uh-huh. He was accompanied by
You want me to read this? Do you want me to read this one?
Yeah, go
There's a
ahead.
lot of it. Yeah. He was accompanied by Sopater, son of Pyrrhus from Berea, Aristarchus and Secundus from Thessalonica, Gaius from Derbe, Timothy also, Tychicus and Trophimus from the province of Asia. Who are these men? First, we have an idea as to why at least some of them are accompanying Paul. Go ahead and read that one.
Okay, 1 Corinthians 16, 1-4. Now about the collection for the Lord's people, do what I told the Galatian church to do. On the first day of every week, each one of you should set aside a sum of money in keeping with your income, saving it up, so that when I come, no collections will have to be made. Then when I arrive, I will give letters of introduction to the men you have approved and send them with your gift to Jerusalem. If it seems advisable for me to go also, I will accompany.
So we know why some of them are accompanying Paul. They are including the monies from their churches, and they're all traveling together that way. Sopater, son of Pyrrhus from Berea and Gaius from Derbe, both Greek Christians probably traveling with Paul as representatives of their churches and their towns. Aristarchus from Thessalonica, a Greek Christian probably traveling with Paul as a representative of the church in Thessalonica. We've met him before. Secundus from Thessalonica, a Greek Christian probably traveling with Paul as a representative of the church in Thessalonica. The name Secundus was a common name for a slave, secundus meaning second. Slaves were not called by their true names, but by their ranking in the home. He was second in the household he had worked at. Timothy, reminder that Paul had Timothy go from Corinth up to Macedonia, and there he would meet him there. They are now together again. Both First and Second Timothy will be written to him by Paul. Tychicus from the province of Asia. Although he's a Greek Christian, probably traveling with Paul as a representative of the church in Ephesus, he's listed several times as Paul's faithful messenger. The scripture in Colossians is just an example. Go ahead and read that.
Colossians 4:7.
Sure.
I say that. Will tell you all the news about me. He is a dear brother, a faithful minister, and fellow servant in the Lord.
Yeah, Trophimus from the province of Asia. Although he is a Greek Christian, probably traveling with Paul as a representative of the church in Ephesus, he is the one about which problems for Paul will arise in Jerusalem, although he did nothing wrong.
These men went on ahead and waited for us at Troas, but we sailed from Philippi after the festival of unleavened bread, and 5 days later joined the others at Troas, where we stayed 7 days.
Where is everyone before Paul has them go ahead of him?
Macedonia.
All right, okay. The 3 months that Paul stayed in Corinth were probably in what season, according to the scripture shown below?
Winter.
Yeah. Where did they all meet?
Troas.
Paul follows the men, but stops where?
Philippi.
Right. How does Paul get to Troas?
Ship.
Yeah. The wind must have been difficult. It says usually only a 2-day trip. How long did they stay in Troas?
7 days.
Notice the we in verse 6. What does this mean, we?
Luke.
Luke is with them now. Luke, remember, we had dropped him off in Philippi, and he's now with them.
On the first day of the week, we came together to break bread. Paul spoke to the people, and because he intended to leave the next day, kept on talking until midnight. There were many lamps in the upstairs room where we were meeting. Seated in a window was a young man named
Eutychus.
who was sinking into a deep sleep as Paul talked on and on. When he was sound asleep, he fell to the ground from the 3rd story and was picked up dead.
Right. What day of the week did the group come together to break bread?
Monday?
Yeah, Sunday, actually. The first day of the week of the month is, first day of the week is Sunday, not Monday, right? Seventh
Okay.
day is Sabbath. How long into the night did Paul keep talking?
Midnight.
Right. Why did he talk this long?
He was going the next day.
Right.
Oh, he figured he'd just keep talking.
Right. Explain what happened to Eutychus.
He was in a deep sleep and fell to the ground from the third story and was picked up dead.
Right. They were in the third story. They probably had the lamps on. It got kind of warm. And Paul is talking forever. And Eutychus is sitting in the window and he falls asleep and falls out the window. Yeah. How do you think that many lamps contributed to the boy's drowsiness?
Well, like you said, it was warm inside from the lamp.
Well, I'm sure they're gas lamps, they're not electrical lamps. So they're producing heat.
Yeah. Paul went down, threw himself on the young man, and put his arms around him. Don't be alarmed, he said. He's alive. Then he went upstairs again and broke bread and ate. After talking until daylight, he left. The people took the young man home alive and were greatly comforted.
How far did the boy fall?
3 stories.
Go ahead and complete number 2.
Paul went down. Does this mean everyone was on the 3rd story of the building?
Do you think everyone was on the 3rd story of the building?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Many
Yeah. Originally, when you read the story, you don't assume that they're all up on the 3rd story, but apparently everything happened on the 3rd story. So, he was preaching on the 3rd story. What did Paul do when he got to the boy?
Threw himself on the young man and put his arms around him.
Was Paul able to bring the boy back to life?
Yes.
Verse 12 should really be after verse 10, in my opinion. It is hard to believe that the people did not worry about bringing the boy home until Paul stopped preaching. Right. So, he heals the boy. They all go back to preaching. So you would think that they took the young man home. They were pretty happy about it. But what did Paul do before he continued to preach?
Went upstairs again and broke bread and ate.
How much longer did Paul preach?
Until daylight.
Right. So, yeah. So now we come to the end of the chapter. Number 6, who fell out of the 3rd story window?
How do you say his name?
Eutychus. 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 Yeah, Eutychus or Eutychus.
Okay.
On his way from Ephesus to Macedonia, Paul will travel through Troas, Philippi, Thessalonica, and
Berea.
Yeah. In 1 Corinthians 16:1, he tells the disciples in Corinth to take up a
Collection.
for the Lord's people in Jerusalem. Number 12, who did Paul not find in Troas?
Titus.
One down. When the author says we, who is part of the group?
Luke.
Number 2, from Ephesus, Paul set out for the area known as
Macedonia.
Number 3, how many days did the group of men and Paul stay in Troas?
7.
What day was Paul preaching until midnight?
Tuesday.
Okay. No, it would be not. What day was the first day of the week, right? Be Sunday?
Sunday.
Yeah.
Oh, Sunday.
Yeah.
I got one wrong.
From Macedonia, he traveled to where?
Greece.
Where he stayed 3 months. Of the men who accompanied Paul in Acts 24, who had a slave name?
Secundius.
Secundus. Yeah, Secundus. Yeah.
Secundus.
Okay, number 9. We sailed from blank after the festival of unleavened bread.
Philippi.
Okay. And 11. Some Jews had plotted together against him just as Paul was about to sail to where?
Syria.
Yeah. Very good.
Sunday.
All right, that's the end of this chapter. Let me go ahead and stop that.